The song didn't end when the music stopped. It ended when the entire theater went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than applause, the kind that tells you something impossible just happened. And before I take you back to how one Filipino Elvis broke the rules of America's Got Talent with a single voice, do me one favor right now, tap like, subscribe to this channel, and stay with me until the final note, because this story doesn't just change a competition, it changes a life. They said the rules were clear. 1 contestant. 1 microphone. No backing tracks that weren't approved. No second chances once the music started. He stood backstage gripping a worn-out scarf, fingers trembling, heart pounding like a drum he'd played his whole life but never mastered. His name barely appeared on the screen, mispronounced by the stage manager, but he didn't correct it. He never corrected anyone. Back home in a small coastal town in the Philippines, he'd learned early that being quiet kept you safe. Singing was the only time he felt real. He grew up listening to a crackling radio that barely caught stations from the city. His father worked overseas, his mother sold food by the road, and the radio was his teacher. When Elvis Presley came through those speakers, something clicked. It wasn't just the voice. It was the loneliness wrapped in confidence, the pain hidden behind swagger. He practiced in secret, mimicking every shake, every breath, every low growl, not to become Elvis, but to survive his own fear. The neighbors laughed. The kids teased him. Why sing like a dead foreigner, they said. But he sang anyway. Years later, he found himself standing on one of the biggest stages in the world, lights so bright they erased the audience into darkness. The judges smiled politely, the kind of smiles that say, "Impress me if you can." He introduced himself softly, his accent thick, his eyes wet. When asked why he was there, he paused too long. Because, he finally said, "I promised my younger self I wouldn't stay invisible forever." The music started wrong. The track cut out after 2 seconds. Gasps rippled through the theater. A producer waved frantically from the side. The rules said stop. Restart. Or walk off. The judges leaned forward, ready to interrupt. His mind screamed to freeze, to apologize, to disappear like he always had. But instead, something broke open inside him. He lifted the microphone, closed his eyes, and sang. No music. No safety net. Just air and memory. His voice didn't sound like Elvis at first. It sounded like a man who had waited too long to be heard. Raw. Shaking. Human. Then, slowly, the transformation happened. The tone deepened. The phrasing curved like smoke. The ghost of Elvis wasn't copied, it was honored. Every note carried the weight of distance, of family dinners missed, of dreams postponed because survival came first. People in the audience started crying before they even realized it. One judge whispered, "Oh my God," forgetting the cameras. A producer rushed the stage, signaling to stop. This wasn't allowed. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't safe. But the judges didn't hit their buzzers. They didn't stand either. They were frozen, trapped in the same moment as everyone else. When he reached the final line, his voice cracked, not as a mistake, but as a confession. The last note hung in the air, unfinished, like a question. Silence. Then the eruption came. Not polite clapping. Not standing ovations. Something wilder. People shouting, crying, stomping, hugging strangers. One judge stood up slowly, eyes red, and said, "You broke the rules." The crowd gasped. The man on stage lowered his head, already bracing for the end. Then the judge continued, "And thank God you did." They let him start again, this time with the music restored, but it didn't matter anymore. The moment had already happened. The performance went viral within hours. Comments flooded in from Filipinos around the world, from Elvis fans who never expected to feel that song again, from people who had been told their voice didn't belong. Some said he disrespected the rules. Most said he reminded them why music exists. Behind the scenes, he almost quit. The pressure was overwhelming. The hate cut deep. He called his mother, voice shaking, and told her he was scared. She laughed gently and said, "You were scared the first time you sang too. You didn't stop then." So he stayed. Week after week, he sang not just like Elvis, but like himself. Each performance peeled back another layer: grief, hope, gratitude. He didn't win the trophy. That's not the ending people expect. But he won something else. He went from invisible to unforgettable. From copying a legend to becoming one voice among millions that mattered. And that final night, as he stood on stage one last time, he looked into the camera and smiled, not with confidence, but with peace. The same scarf around his neck. The same quiet man. But no longer silent. The song ended again that night, just like it did the first time. And once more, the silence came before the applause. Because some voices don't just perform, they linger. If this story moved you even a little, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that breaking the rules isn't always rebellion. Sometimes, it's destiny singing when the music fails, before the first note was ever sung, before the judges leaned forward, before the rules were broken. Something else happened. Someone at home clicked a video, not knowing they were about to feel seen for the first time in years. So before we dive into this story, take 1 second right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end. Because this isn't just about a performance. It's about a moment when one voice refused to stay quiet, even when the world told him it should. He waited alone in the hallway, the sound of cheering leaking through the walls like distant thunder. Contestants passed him with nervous laughs and practiced smiles, but he stayed still, humming softly to himself. His hands shook, not from fear of the judges, but from fear of failing the boy he once was, the boy who used to sing Elvis songs into a broken mirror while the rest of the house slept. In his hometown in the Philippines, dreams didn't come with spotlights. They came with warnings. Singing won't feed you, people said. Be realistic. So he learned to sing quietly. To work hard. To put dreams away like fragile things that might shatter if touched too often. But Elvis never left him. The music followed him through construction jobs, long nights, lonely mornings overseas. Elvis sounded like longing. Like wanting more but smiling anyway. And that's what he brought with him to the AGT stage, not an impression, not a gimmick, but a lifetime of holding something in. When his name was called, he walked out slowly, almost cautiously, as if the stage might disappear if he moved too fast. The lights hit him, and suddenly he was no longer a man in his 30s. He was that child again, barefoot, listening to a radio that barely worked. The judges asked their questions. Why Elvis? Why now? He swallowed hard and said, because some dreams wait until you are brave enough to carry them. The band was ready. The cue was given. And then everything went wrong. The track glitched, skipped, then died completely. Confusion rippled through the room. A hand shot up from offstage signaling to stop. According to the rules, this was it. Technical failure meant restart or elimination. The judges exchanged looks. The audience murmured. He stood there, microphone in hand, heart racing. This was the moment fear had always won before. But instead of stopping, he took a breath. And sang. At first, it was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the room like a confession. No music, no timing, no protection. Just his voice, cracked and honest. You could hear every scar in it. Every mile traveled. Every goodbye that came too soon. As the melody found its shape, the room changed. The judges forgot their pens. The audience forgot to breathe. This wasn't Elvis Presley on that stage. This was a man singing for every version of himself that had been told to sit down and be quiet. A producer rushed forward again. This wasn't allowed. Cameras weren't prepared. This wasn't planned television. But no one stopped him. Because stopping him would have meant stopping something real. By the final note, his voice broke, not because he failed, but because he finally let go. Tears rolled down his face, not dramatic, not forced, just human. When the sound faded, the silence was unbearable. One judge wiped their eyes. Another stood, shaking their head in disbelief. You weren't supposed to do that, one of them said softly. Before the judges ever spoke, before the lights flared and the rules mattered, a single breath was taken by a man who had waited his entire life to be heard. And before you hear how one Filipino Elvis shattered expectations and broke AGT's rules with nothing but his voice, hit like, subscribe to this channel, and stay with me until the very end, because this story isn't just entertainment. It's a reminder of what happens when courage finally gets louder than fear. He stood at the edge of the stage, eyes closed, lips moving silently as if praying to a song only he could hear. The scarf around his neck was old, frayed at the ends, a small piece of home he carried with him everywhere. Back in the Philippines, that scarf had been mocked almost as much as his voice. "You're not Elvis," they'd say. "You're just pretending." But pretending was how he survived. Pretending gave him hope when real life demanded practicality, obedience, silence. As a child, he sang to escape hunger, loneliness, and the ache of watching his parents work themselves thin. Elvis became his companion through static-filled radios and long blackouts. He didn't understand every English word, but he understood the feeling. The ache. The yearning. The sound of a man who wanted more from life but sang anyway. That sound shaped him. Carried him. Saved him. Now, years later, he stepped into the blinding light of America's Got Talent, heart racing, palms slick with sweat. The judges asked their questions, and he answered humbly, almost apologetically. He didn't speak like someone chasing fame. He spoke like someone honoring a promise. "I sing," he said quietly, "because it is the only time I feel brave." The music cue came. Then it vanished. The track failed. Dead silence swallowed the stage. Crew members panicked. A signal flashed from the side, "Stop, reset, rules are rules." The audience stirred. The judges leaned forward, waiting for the moment to end. This was it. The familiar ending. The dream slipping away because something went wrong. He could have stopped. Instead, he sang. No band. No backup. No permission. His voice rose uncertainly at first, like it was testing the air, asking if it was allowed to exist. Then it grew stronger, deeper, filled with every sacrifice he'd ever made. The sound wasn't polished. It was honest. You could hear the years of restraint cracking open. You could hear the boy, the worker, the dreamer all at once. The theater froze. A rule was being broken, but something sacred was happening. A producer rushed forward, whispering urgently. This wasn't planned. This wasn't safe. This wasn't allowed. But no one stopped him. Not the judges. Not the audience. Not the cameras. Because stopping him would have meant denying something rare to truth without a filter. When the final note came, it shattered. His voice broke, and so did something else, the invisible wall between performer and people. Tears streamed down faces across the room. One judge covered their mouth. Another stood slowly, stunned. That, one of them finally said, voice trembling, was not supposed to happen. The crowd held its breath. But, the judge continued, that is exactly why it mattered. They let him perform again with the track restored, but the moment had already burned itself into history. Clips spread like wildfire. Millions watched a man sing without protection, without permission, without fear. Some criticized him. Many defended him. Most felt something they hadn't expected. The journey wasn't easy after that. Pressure mounted. Expectations grew heavy. He doubted himself. He nearly walked away more than once. But messages poured in, from overseas workers, from quiet singers, from people who'd been told their voice didn't belong. You sang for me, they said. And that was enough to keep going. He didn't win the trophy. But he won something far greater. He walked off that stage knowing he had finally been heard, not as an imitation, not as a gimmick, but as a man who dared to sing when the music failed. A man who proved that rules can guide you, but they can't define you. And as the season ended, he smiled, not because he had arrived, but because he was no longer afraid of being seen. So if this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember this: sometimes all it takes is one song, one voice, and the courage to keep singing when everything goes silent. The room was loud, the crowd buzzing, the judges chatting, until suddenly, everything stopped. Not because someone told them to, but because one voice was about to rise where silence was never allowed. Before we dive into how one Filipino Elvis broke America's Got Talent's rules and shocked the world, take a second right now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the very end, because this story isn't just about music. It's about what happens when a dream refuses to wait any longer. He stood just off stage, listening to his name echo through the speakers, mispronounced but loud enough to make his chest tighten. He pressed his fingers together the way he always did when he was nervous, a habit formed years ago in a small Filipino town where stages didn't exist and dreams were supposed to be quiet. Singing had never been practical. It was something you did alone, after work, when no one was watching. Especially if you sounded like Elvis Presley. As a boy, he learned Elvis through an old radio with a cracked dial. The signal faded in and out, but the emotion always came through. Elvis sounded like longing, like someone reaching for something just out of reach. That feeling matched his own life perfectly. His parents worked endlessly, money was always tight, and the future felt like something meant for other people. But when he sang, even softly, even badly at first, the world felt wider. People laughed when they heard him imitate Elvis. Some were kind, some cruel. They told him it was strange, unrealistic, embarrassing. But he wasn't trying to be a star. He was trying to feel alive. So he sang at family gatherings, small bars, empty rooms. He sang overseas while working far from home. He sang through loneliness, through doubt, through the quiet fear that maybe everyone else was right. Years later, that fear followed him onto the AGT stage. The lights were blinding. The judges' table looked impossibly far away. When they asked why he chose Elvis, he paused, his voice shaking. Because his songs feel like my life, he said. Strong on the outside, broken inside. A few people smiled politely. Others looked unsure. He could already feel the familiar wall rising. Then the music was supposed to start. It didn't. The track cut out completely. For a split second, his mind went blank. He saw it all slipping away: rules, cameras, disappointment. A stagehand waved from the side. The signal was clear: stop. Reset. Don't continue. The rules didn't allow what was about to happen. But something inside him refused to sit down again. He lifted the microphone and sang. At first, his voice trembled, naked without music to hide behind. You could hear every breath, every flaw, every ounce of fear. But as the melody found its way, something changed. His voice deepened, steadied, carried by years of holding back. This wasn't an impression. This was a confession. Elvis wasn't being copied, he was being understood. The theater transformed. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. Judges leaned forward, frozen. A producer hurried toward the stage, whispering urgently. This wasn't planned. This wasn't allowed. This wasn't safe television. But no one interrupted him. Because stopping him would have meant ending something real. By the final note, his voice cracked wide open. Tears streamed down his face, not from drama, but relief. The silence afterward was heavier than any applause. Then it came raw, explosive, uncontrollable. One judge stood slowly, shaking their head. You broke the rules, they said, and the crowd gasped. He lowered his eyes. Then the judge smiled. And sometimes, that's exactly what music is supposed to do. They let him start again, properly this time, with the track restored. He sang beautifully. But everyone knew the truth: the moment without music was the one that mattered. That clip spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions watched a man choose courage over permission. Some criticized him. Most felt something they couldn't explain. The journey wasn't easy after that. Expectations grew heavy. Comments were cruel at times. He doubted himself, questioned whether he deserved the attention. But messages arrived from all over the world: Filipino workers, quiet singers, people who had been told their voice didn't belong. "You sang my fear." The moment didn't begin with applause, it began with a mistake. A dead silence where music was supposed to be. And before I tell you how one Filipino Elvis turned that silence into the most unforgettable moment in AGT history, do me a quick favor right now: like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. Because this story isn't just about breaking rules, it's about breaking fear. He stood in the wings of the stage, breathing slowly, repeating the lyrics in his head like a lifeline. The fabric of his jacket felt heavier than it should have, soaked with the weight of years he never talked about. Back home in the Philippines, he was known as the guy who sang Elvis songs too seriously, too emotionally, too much like he meant them. People told him it was strange, that it didn't fit him, that it wouldn't lead anywhere. But Elvis wasn't a costume to him. Elvis was survival. Elvis was the sound that carried him through nights when electricity was out, when money was gone, when hope felt irresponsible. He grew up learning early how to shrink himself. Dreams were luxuries. Singing was something you did quietly, behind closed doors, after responsibilities were handled. His parents worked endlessly. Sacrifice was normal. Wanting more felt selfish. But whenever Elvis played on the radio, something inside him stood up straight. That voice sounded like pain dressed as confidence, like loneliness pretending to be strength. He understood that language before he understood English. Years passed. Life happened. He worked overseas. Missed birthdays. Missed funerals. Sang in empty rooms in crowded bars where no one really listened. Still, he kept a promise to himself he made as a boy, that one day, he would sing without apologizing for it. That promise carried him to the AGT stage, knees shaking, heart racing, face calm only because he'd learned how to hide fear well. The judges asked why Elvis. He smiled softly and said, "Because his songs feel like my life." Some nodded. Some looked unsure. The audience waited. The music cue came. Then nothing. The track failed. Silence crashed down like a wave. Crew members moved quickly. A signal flashed from the side: "Stop, reset, rules first." The judges leaned forward, ready to intervene. This was the moment where most people freeze, where years of conditioning say, "Don't cause trouble, don't step out of line." But something inside him finally refused to sit back down. He lifted the microphone and sang. At first, it was fragile. A voice exposed, trembling in open air. No instruments to lean on. No rhythm to hide behind. Just breath and truth. You could hear the nerves, the hunger, the years of restraint breaking open. Then the voice grew. Richer. Deeper. Not an imitation, not a trick, but a soul speaking through a song that had waited a lifetime to be released. The room changed. You could feel it. Conversations stopped. The judges froze. A producer hurried forward, whispering urgently, "This wasn't allowed, this wasn't planned, this wasn't safe." But no one stopped him. Because stopping him would have meant choosing rules over something rare and real. When he reached the final line, his voice cracked wide open. Not because he failed, but because he let everything out. Tears rolled down his face. The silence afterward was unbearable. Then the audience erupted, not politely, not on cue, but emotionally, like they'd all been holding their breath together. One judge stood slowly. "You broke the rules," they said, and the crowd gasped. He lowered his head, already bracing for disappointment. Then the judge continued, voice shaking, "But that was one of the most honest things I've ever heard on this stage." They allowed him to restart properly. The second performance was powerful. Controlled. Beautiful. But everyone knew the truth: the first one was the moment that mattered. That clip spread everywhere. Millions watched a man choose courage over permission. Some criticized him. Many defended him. Most felt seen. The weeks that followed weren't easy. The attention was overwhelming. Expectations grew heavy. Hate comments cut deep. He questioned whether he deserved any of it. But messages poured in from quiet dreamers, overseas workers, people who'd been told their voice didn't belong. "You sang what I never could," they said. And that was enough. He didn't win the trophy. But when the season ended, he walked away changed. He no longer sang to prove himself. He sang because he no longer needed permission. And that's why this story lasts. Not because rules were broken, but because silence was. Because one man stood in a moment meant to stop him and chose to sing anyway. So if this story moved you even a little, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember this, sometimes the music cuts out so the world can finally hear who you really are.